The moment those words left my mouth, I knew I'd said something I could never take back. It was a careless thing, the kind of comment that slips out when you're comfortable enough with someone to stop filtering yourself. I was sitting on a worn leather couch in a basement rec room in Mississauga, half watching a Leafs game with my best friend, a couple of empty Tim Hortons cups on the side table between us. I didn't think before I said it. I never do. That's always been my problem. My name is Connor, and what happened that October changed the shape of my entire life, though it took years before I understood that. Back then I was 23, working as a junior electrician's apprentice and finishing up a part-time business diploma at Sheridan College in the evenings, the kind of in-between life a lot of guys my age were living, not quite settled, not quite a kid anymore either. My best friend since the 7th grade was Tyler Whitmore. We'd grown up 2 streets apart, played house league hockey together for years, and gotten each other through every miserable breakup and every disastrous job interview since high school. Tyler was the kind of friend you don't have to explain yourself to. He just got it. Tyler lived with his mother, Olivia Whitmore, in a 2-story house near the Credit River, the kind with a covered porch and a maple tree out front that turned an almost unbearable shade of orange every fall. His parents had split up when he was 11, and his dad had moved out west for work and mostly stayed there, sending birthday cards and not much else. So it had been Olivia and Tyler for over a decade. It's the two of them making it work. I'd spent so much time in that house that Olivia used to joke I was paying rent and dishes washed. She was an occupational therapist at a rehab clinic in Oakville, the kind of job that asks a lot of a person, physically, emotionally, and somehow she still came home most nights with patients left over. She wasn't loud. She didn't try to be the center of attention, but there was something about her that made people pause when she walked into a room, some quiet certainty in the way she carried herself. To me, she had always just been Tyler's mom. That's what I told myself anyway. I'm not sure I ever fully believed it. It was a Friday night in early October, the kind where the air outside has that first real bite of cold, and you can smell wood smoke from somewhere down the block. Tyler and I had ordered pizza from the place on Dundas that he swore was better than anywhere in the city, and we had the boxes open on the coffee table, a couple of cans of root beer sweating rings into the wood. Nothing special was happening. It was just one of those ordinary nights that you don't realize you'll remember for the rest of your life. Olivia got home around 8, still in her scrubs, her hair pulled back in a low knot that had mostly come loose by the end of her shift. She looked tired in that specific way. People look after a 12-hour day where they've been lifting and steadying other people's bodies, but there was still something graceful about how she moved through the room. Like exhaustion hadn't quite caught up to her posture yet. Tyler made some comment about her still being in her work clothes, teasing her the way sons do and without thinking. Without even a half-second of filtering, I laughed and said his mom was better looking than pretty much every girl I'd dated. The room went quiet in a way that felt almost physical. Tyler turned and looked at me like I'd just said something about his sister, not his mother. My stomach dropped the instant the words were out, and I started laughing nervously, trying to wave it off as a stupid joke, the kind of thing that doesn't mean anything. Olivia had stopped in the doorway to the kitchen. She wasn't moving. She was looking at me with an expression I genuinely couldn't read, not offended, not flattered exactly, just curious, like she was turning something over in her mind for the first time. And then she asked if I'd like to take her out sometime. For a second, I thought it was a joke right back at me. Tyler let out this short, nervous laugh, clearly thinking the same thing. But Olivia didn't laugh. She just looked at me steadily and said she meant it. The silence after that stretched out longer than any silence I'd ever sat through. I could feel Tyler's eyes on me, waiting for me to say something that would make the moment normal again, make it a joke we could all laugh off and never bring up. But nothing about it felt like it was going back to normal. I stammered out something about how I'd only been kidding, that I didn't mean anything serious by it. Olivia just gave a small smile, shrugged one shoulder, and said that sometimes the things people joke about are the things they mean most. Then she walked down the hall toward her room, and Tyler and I sat there in a silence I didn't know how to break. He barely said 2 words to me the rest of that night. I drove home around 11, feeling like I'd something I didn't even understand the shape of yet. For the next couple of weeks, I kept replaying it. At first, it was just embarrassment, the kind that makes you cringe doing dishes or lying in bed at 2 in the morning. But underneath that, something else started to surface. something I didn't want to look at too closely. Olivia wasn't just Tyler's mom anymore in my head. She was a woman who'd spent over a decade holding a household together on her own, who worked brutal hours helping strangers relearn how to walk and dress themselves, and still came home with something kind left in her. I started seeing her, really seeing her, for the first time. I pulled back from going to Tyler's place as much, partly out of guilt, partly because I genuinely didn't know how to act around either of them anymore. But one Tuesday I went by to grab a socket wrench I'd left in their garage, and I ran into Olivia outside, kneeling by the flower bed near the porch steps, pulling out the last of the summer's dead annuals before the frost really set in. We ended up talking. Just small stuff at first, work, the diploma program, how her shifts had been. But it drifted somewhere deeper without either of us really steering it there. She told me how isolating it could feel, spending years pouring everything into raising someone, and then looking up one day to realize you'd quietly given up most of your own life in the process. She mentioned a pottery class she used to take before Tyler was born and hadn't gone back to in 15 years. I listened in a way I don't think I'd ever really listened to anyone before. Those conversations kept happening over the following month. Sometimes just 5 minutes by the garage, sometimes a full hour on the porch with mugs of tea going cold between us. Neither of us brought up that night directly, but it sat underneath everything we said. The way a stone sits under stills of water. You can't always see it, but you know exactly where it is. Then one evening in November, with the porch light buzzing faintly above us, and our breath showing in the cold, she told me that life doesn't really organize itself around the rules people expect it to follow. She said, if I had actually meant what I'd said that night, the honest thing to do was admit it to myself instead of running from it. Then she went back inside and left me standing there with my hands in my jacket pockets, not moving for a long time. I didn't sleep much that night. I thought about Tyler, about 13 years of friendship, about the kind of line you're not supposed to cross even by accident. But I also kept circling back to the look on Olivia's face when she'd said that, calm and a little hopeful, like she'd been waiting a long time to say it out loud. A week later, I asked Tyler if we could talk. It was one of the hardest conversations of my life. I told him something had shifted in me that I hadn't asked for and didn't fully understand, that I respected him more than almost anyone, and that I never wanted to hurt him. Then I told him the part that scared me most, that I thought I had feelings for his mother. He reacted about how you'd expect. He was furious, and honestly, he had every right to be. He stopped answering my texts. He stopped showing up to the rink on Sunday mornings where we usually played pickup. Weeks stretched into months, and the friendship I'd built my whole adult identity around seemed to just evaporate. It was the lowest stretch of my life. I questioned everything, my judgment, my loyalty, whether some things really shouldn't ever be crossed no matter what you feel. Olivia and I barely spoke during that time either. She didn't want to be the reason Tyler and I stayed broken, so she kept her distance even though I could tell it cost her something to do it. But slowly, something else started happening that neither of us had pushed for. Tyler started noticing things about his mother he'd never paid attention to before. How quiet the house was after he left for work in the mornings, how she'd started eating dinner alone in front of the TV more nights than not, how much of her adult life had been spent making sure he had everything he needed while she went without things she never even mentioned wanting. Almost 5 months after that conversation, Tyler called me out of nowhere. His voice was steadier than I expected, none of the anger from before. He told me something I still think about. He said if I ever hurt his mom, he'd never forgive me for it. Not as a threat, just as a fact he needed me to understand. But he also said that maybe life was messier than the version he wanted it to be, and that if I actually cared about her, he wasn't going to stand in the way of that anymore. A few weeks after that, Olivia and I went on our first real date. Nothing extravagant. Dinner at a small Italian place on Lakeshore in Port Credit, the kind with checkered tablecloths and a server who'd clearly worked there for 20 years. We talked for almost 3 hours about everything. Her childhood in Thunder Bay, my disastrous first year of college, the things we'd both quietly given up on without meaning to. It felt less like a first date and more like two people finally being honest with each other after months of circling the truth. Now, before I get to where things ended up, I want to ask you something. If you've ever had a moment where one offhand comment, one unplanned second, completely rerouted the direction of your life, type the word "unskekted" in the comments below. I'd genuinely like to know how many of you have lived through something like this too. 6 years on, Tyler and I are still close, maybe closer than we were before, in a strange way. It wasn't easy getting here. There were holidays that felt unbearably awkward, arguments that flared up out of nowhere over something completely unrelated, months where I genuinely wondered if I'd traded a friendship for something that wasn't worth it. But time has a way of sanding down even the sharpest edges, if you let it. Tyler eventually told me something that stuck with me. He said love apparently doesn't care much about the tidy categories people try to put it in. It shows up in strange places, in awkward garage conversations and porch lights buzzing in November, and the dumbest joke you've ever made in your life. Olivia and I got married 2 years ago, in her sister's backyard in Burlington, with about 40 people and a string quartet she insisted on hiring. Tyler stood up as my best man. Every so often, when the three of us are sitting around the kitchen table, usually around the holidays with too much food on the table, Tyler brings up that night with the pizza boxes and the root beer cans, the night I said the stupidest thing I'd ever said out loud. And every time, Olivia just smiles and says it wasn't stupid at all. It was just early.